When I think of some of my most nostalgic memories in gaming, many center around one IP, Star Wars. Whether it be Battlefront, LEGO games, Jedi Academy, Knights of the Old Republic, even some of the movie tie-in games like Revenge of the Sith. Star Wars games were a big part of my childhood gaming experience, and those games I just listed were the ones I remember the most fondly out of the wealth of Star Wars games out there. But out of all the Star Wars games that I've played, no game quite has a grip on my nostalgia like The Force Unleashed, which, looking back to see the Metacritic, it wasn't a bad reception, but the reception wasn't great either. But back in September 2008, when I was 11 years old, The Force Unleashed blew my damn mind. I just hadn't played anything in the Star Wars universe that let the player feel such a strong sense of power. Playing around with enemies, flinging them into the abyss, electrocuting, force pushing, and the lightsaber combat at the time was all just incredible, and all from the perspective of Darth Vader's apprentice, which only helps take off the shackles the Jedi force upon themselves and go all out into chaos. Before I experienced Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, The Force Unleashed was one of, if not my favorite Star Wars games ever. It was just a blast to play, and the story was something I found to be very unique for Star Wars. But now, I'm 25. The Force Unleashed is coming up on 14 years old, and as I said, I believe Fallen Order just took what The Force Unleashed did so well and did it better in some aspects. So, after all this time, I finally went back and replayed The Force Unleashed, its 3 DLC add-ons, and now the question is Star Wars The Force Unleashed as good as I remember all these years later? Let's find out. Just a quick heads up before we get stuck into the video, I am going to be covering Star Wars The Force Unleashed 2 as well, so if you're interested in seeing that video, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out or forget. Alright, let's get started. The development for Star Wars The Force Unleashed began all the way back in 2004, or at least the idea of creating a new Star Wars game began in 2004. It's unclear at what year exactly The Force Unleashed began to take shape and when the central ideas began to form though, because the concept for The Force Unleashed wasn't the team's first idea. The team contemplated making a Darth Maul game and a game centered around a freedom fighter Wookiee that seemed to carry the most steam before quickly being shut down by George Lucas. George Lucas was actively involved in The Force Unleashed development, but he was adamant a Star Wars game needed to have adventure, humor, and drama, his pillars in a Star Wars story, and, well, given Wookiees don't talk in a language we understand, he didn't see the possibility for drama in that game's potential. Honestly, sounded kind of awesome though, so if someone else wants to give that idea a crack, I'd be down to see it. Regardless, this talk with Lucas helped LucasArts narrow down the sort of protagonist they wanted to create in their next game. They wanted this character to be powerful and strong, a phrase they use in the making of quite a lot being unleashing the full power and potential of the Force, and the chaos and destruction that would entail. George loved this idea from a core gameplay perspective and gave the team permission to expand upon this concept by allowing Darth Vader to have a secret apprentice in between the 3rd and 4th movie. George's involvement with The Force Unleashed is actually really interesting because obviously Star Wars is his baby, and so LucasArts had to run a lot of the canon and character involvements by him before proceeding, oftentimes through email and fax due to his schedule. From a personal creative standpoint, sounds a little annoying if I'm honest, but one, I completely understand why this is the case, and two, from what I've heard, as long as you weren't being outrageous, Lucas was a-okay with a lot of these ideas and adding new characters into the mythos. It's just not a dynamic I've really seen too often, but I think George really did love how this game and its story ended up, which is really awesome. Anyways, with George's approval to go ahead with The Force Unleashed, You have a solid foundation. The pressure was just on to make the damn thing. That's about all there is in this development story that I think is truly interesting. The team later in the making of dives into the engine, force mechanics, but nothing so much behind the scenes, unfortunately, just explaining how these mechanics work and general story points. I was actually contemplating skipping this segment because there isn't a lot out there that I could find in regards to the making of The Force Unleashed. What made me change my mind though, and what I found intriguing, is that creative process and how when you're dealing with something like Star Wars, you're going to have a lot of creative decisions essentially made and decided outside of the studio. From all accounts, George was really receptive and questioned decisions, very open with expanding on his universe, but it's just not a style of development I've discussed up to this point, and something personally I don't know if I'd be stoked with if, it wasn't Star Wars, but hey, I love the end result, so what's that say about me? Regardless, Star Wars The Force Unleashed spent roughly between 2 and 3 years in development if I had to venture an educated guess, and released in September 2008 to a solid reception. But how does it hold up today? Star Wars The Force Unleashed begins in the early stages of the Galactic Empire's rule, with Imperial spies set out to locate a surviving Jedi from Order 66, named Kento Marek, who they find on Kashyyyk. The game begins with Darth Vader arriving on the Wookiee homeworld and defeating Marek in battle. Shortly after, Malek's son Garen grabs Vader's lightsaber with the Force and realizes the boy's strong connection to the Force. Vader then kills Malek, saves Galen from the gun-happy stormtroopers, and leaves with the boy, raising him to become his secret apprentice. Years later, and a badass new alias to boot, Starkiller completes his training and is sent by Vader to eliminate the few remaining Jedi survivors across the galaxy in order to prepare himself for assassinating the Emperor, so that Vader and himself can rule the galaxy together. Starkiller travels on his personal ship, the Rogue Shadow, alongside his training droid Proxy, a droid programmed to try and kill Starkiller, and his new pilot Juno Eclipse. Our targets include Ram Koda, a Clone Wars veteran and leader of a militia, Kazdan Paratus, insane after the years of isolation on Raxus Prime, and Shaak Ti, who is hiding on the planet Felucia. Before we kill Shaak Ti though, she warns Starkiller that Vader will eventually betray him. With his mission complete, Starkiller is summoned by Vader as the Emperor arrives. Vader then swiftly impales Starkiller at the Emperor's request, hurls Starkiller through a window into space, all in order to prove his loyalty to the Emperor. What the Emperor is unaware about though is the fact Vader has Starkiller recovered and resuscitated. Vader sends Starkiller to foster a rebellion among the Empire's enemies as a part of a grand plan to create the proper conditions to overthrow the Emperor. Starkiller rescues Juno, who was arrested and branded a traitor to the Empire for piloting Starkiller, and Starkiller, Juno, and Proxy escape the Empire. In search of allies to aid in his mission, Starkiller finds an alive Kota on Cloud City, now blind from his battle with Starkiller and reduced to alcoholism. But we rescue him from Imperial forces nonetheless. The group travels to Kashyyyk to locate Kota's contact, Princess Leia, in order to try and gain a seating with her father, Senator Organa. Starkiller discovers his old home, meeting his father's spirit, who is filled with sorrow and remorse that he ended up being brought up by Vader. Starkiller rescues Leia, liberates the enslaved Wookiees at the princess's request, and Kota reveals that the senator has been captured after traveling to Felucia to find Shaak Ti, hoping she would rescue Leia. Shaak Ti was one of the Jedi Starkiller hunted down and slayed earlier, so yeah, that search has resulted in his capture by the hands of Shaak Ti's former apprentice, Maris Brood, who has now succumbed to the dark side. Starkiller defeats Brood but spares her life and convinces the senator to join the rebellion. In order to convince more senators to join the rebellion as well, Vader suggests that they attack a Star Destroyer facility on Raxus Prime in order to show them that the Empire is vulnerable. Juno stumbles in on this meeting, learning that Starkiller is still serving Vader and berates him for, well, being so stupid, but agrees to stay silent on the matter. On Raxus Prime, Starkiller is attacked by Proxy, who attempts to fulfill his programming and kill him, though again, he does not succeed. Starkiller then goes on to destroy the facility and pulls a goddamn Star Destroyer out of the sky in one of the most badass moments in Star Wars of all time. And with this success, the senators finally formalize a rebellion. This lasts all of 2 seconds though, as Vader arrives and arrests them all, overpowering Starkiller and revealing that he was merely a pawn in an attempt to lure out the Empire's enemies. He never intended to overthrow the Emperor. Before he can deal the finishing blow, Starkiller is saved when Proxy sacrifices himself by attacking Vader. Juno rescues Starkiller, who then uses the Force to see that Kota and the senators are being held on the Death Star. Starkiller bids Juno farewell, battles his way through the station, and reaches the Emperor's throne room. Vader confronts him, but Starkiller finally defeats his former master and faces the Emperor, who tries to coax him into killing Vader so that he can take his place. Kota tries to attack the Emperor before being subdued by lightning, and it's at this point where the player must choose between saving Kota, the light side ending, or killing Vader, the dark side ending. Now personally, I chose the light side ending, but I will be going over both. If you choose to save Kota, Starkiller defeats the Emperor but spares him at the request of Kota. The Emperor unleashes Force Lightning at Kota, but Starkiller absorbs it, sacrificing himself to allow Kota and the senators to escape on the Rogue Shadow. The Emperor and Vader become concerned that Starkiller has become a martyr to inspire the newly formed rebellion. On Kashyyyk, the senators proceed with the Rebel Alliance, and Leia chooses Starkiller's family crest as their iconic symbol. Kota tells Juno that among Starkiller's dark thoughts, Juno was one bright spot that he held onto right until his end, also revealing he knew that Starkiller was Vader's apprentice all along. If we choose the dark side option, Starkiller kills Vader and is congratulated by the Emperor, who orders him to kill Kota to sever his ties to the Jedi and become a Sith Lord. Starkiller instead attacks the Emperor, who foils his attempt and then crushes him with his own ship, severely injuring him and killing Juno, Kota, and the senators. Starkiller later awakens to find his body has melded with armor to continue to serve the Emperor, though he assures Starkiller that he will be replaced once he finds a new apprentice. Whatever your choice may be, that's the end of the story for Star Wars: The Force Unleashed. As a fan of Star Wars, this story is right up there with one of my favorites. That's not to say it's perfect and I don't have my gripes, but overall, this is a great Star Wars story that, whilst maybe not considered canon anymore, adds a lot to the Star Wars mythos. I will admit a personal bias of mine before we dive into this story though. The period in the Star Wars universe I find the most interesting is in between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. You have a lot of unknowns in between. My nostalgia for Star Wars is the strongest for both of these movies. It's just my sort of Star Wars. So of course I love the idea of exploring Darth Vader during this time, giving him a secret apprentice and continuing the cleanup from Order 66. And The Force Unleashed takes that concept and runs with it beautifully. Starkiller is such a compelling primary protagonist, and his character arc and progression throughout this story is what makes it so great. Starting off as this frightened child who has just witnessed his father's death, then quickly moving on to the finished product of spending years and years under Darth Vader. The fatherhood dynamic between Darth Vader and Starkiller is what makes his choices and decisions so interesting because, I mean, if we're honest, it's obvious Vader is using Starkiller for whatever benefit it may be at the time. saying and doing whatever it takes to gain his trust no matter what has happened before, which at times is insane. Nearly dying a few times by his hand just gets brushed aside with relative ease by Starkiller because he believes Vader is in his corner. It's this naivety about Starkiller that brings him back to the realm of being relatable, but also exposes that childhood innocence again that I personally found really compelling, which is a character element much needed after you see just how powerful Starkiller is. Starkiller just follows Vader and his orders so willingly, to a point at times it's almost unbelievable, and a point where some more player choice could have been awesome, but I do understand the dynamic they were going for. I mean, it's mirrored in this game with Sidious and Vader. Just the willingness to use up assets until you find something better is an element about the Force Unleashed they use really effectively. In regards to Starkiller himself though, I did love his conflict of morals once he begins helping form the rebellion. Yes, Vader has put him up to this, but it's like that story of the undercover cop maybe enjoying the criminal life too much, just vice versa. You begin to see Starkiller's true personality, not the one Vader has created, but his own thoughts and opinions, where he stands and what is important to him. It's also an interesting dynamic in the story when you have Starkiller slowly coming over to the light, but as soon as Vader is back in the picture, he's right back to being his little whipping boy, though I think this may have something to do with not wanting to make Starkiller all good or all bad in order to let the player decide in the end, which I don't mind, just the back and forth feels a little abrupt at times. Starkiller's inner conflict is an element that I think makes him a really interesting protagonist, and again, not dissimilar to Anakin's path, but just vice versa. Maybe I find him so interesting because the Sith are an element to Star Wars not as freely explored in film and video games, but here in The Force Unleashed, they definitely highlight the pros with unlimited Force powers, but also the cons of, well, fear of death at all times, and Starkiller is a great vessel to show the peak of the Sith as well as their downfalls. Outside of Starkiller though, I did also really enjoy his supporting cast here. Again, I think Vader in his dynamic is really compelling, constantly keeping the player on our toes, but whether it be characters like Proxy being the comic relief, or Coda as the almost father figure on the light side. The characters around Starkiller further improve and show lighter sides to this on the surface angry, hate-filled character, and I really like that. What I'm not a big fan of is Juno Eclipse, or at least her and Starkiller's relationship. To me, it just feels a bit forced. It doesn't have enough time to marinate, and whilst I don't think their relationship is terrible, it just, it doesn't really flow naturally into a relationship. No back and forth, just sort of, hey, they like each other from the minimal interactions. I understand why they made the decision to have Juno be the love interest to show a softer side to Starkiller, but I think that would have already happened through spending more time with Coda or helping form the rebellion. Regardless, it isn't that big a deal, it's fine, but not my favorite aspect of the story. Overall, the story for me is just one of my favorites. I thought it was going to be good because, well, that's what my memory told me, but you never know until you jump back in. But I love Starkiller's story probably more today than I did back in 2008. I'm not sure whether it's the Sith element, the Darth Vader's apprentice element, the conflict of morals he faces for a good majority of the game. I can't pin it down to one area, it's just everything that makes up his character, and that includes his supporting cast, is something I just am hooked in from beginning to end. I will say the endings, no matter which one, do end rather somberly. I mean, we either become the new Darth Vader, which is pretty badass, or die and are mourned by the rebellion. But as a whole, this story is a great time to experience, and it uses fan service really expertly. It's a shame Disney wants to ignore Starkiller's story, lumping it in with almost a what-if situation, because this idea and how well it was executed deserves to be canon. As much as I love the story, the gameplay was why I was really excited to revisit The Force Unleashed, because back in 2008, it was unlike anything I'd experienced from Star Wars. The amount of power Starkiller exuded using the Force to push, pick up and throw, electrocuting all that stand in your way. It was just a level of power within the Force that I'd never experienced before, and I loved it. That level of power in the Force mixed with the great lightsaber combat is why after all these years I held the game in such high regard, why I love Starkiller so much as a Star Wars protagonist, and why I was so nostalgic about this game going in. Unfortunately, like everything, age does catch up with you, and after playing The Force Unleashed today, I can definitely say it has dated quite a bit. That's not to say the gameplay is bad or it's unenjoyable, but I'm looking at this game now through the eyes of someone who has played Fallen Order, and what made The Force Unleashed so great back in the day was taken to new levels in that game. I know it's unfair to compare games over a decade apart, but that's just what happens. Things improve, dating the previous version. Again, I still really enjoyed playing The Force Unleashed. Some aspects just leave something to be desired today. Enough teasing though, let's jump straight into The Force Unleashed bread and butter combat. Now there is two aspects to the combat that have aged very differently. The lightsaber combat feels more like your run-of-the-mill hack and slasher, but the Force abilities are what add that spice and help mix up the combat, adding that much needed variety. That's not to say the lightsaber combat is bad, but we've seen it before elsewhere. You have various button combinations that mostly stick to one button unless incorporating Force abilities, and just by itself, the lightsaber combat does get repetitive or a bit brainless quicker than it probably should. Is this a personal deal breaker for me? Not really, but maybe that's because of the awesomeness that comes along with wielding a lightsaber. My biggest issue with the lightsaber combat is how effective one particular combination is. The lightsaber mixed with the Force lightning is ridiculously useful. Even enemies not affected by Force lightning are stunned and hurt by this attack, and it's just too useful. Obviously, there is nothing forcing you to use this attack, but it seems to be the only thing that damages certain enemies, and well, I'm all about efficiency, so I use the ever-loving crap out of this combo. I want it to be clear, the Force abilities also can suffer from the dreaded repetition, but you can play around with these combinations far more than the lightsaber combat. With all that being said, again, whether it's the inner child or whatever it is, playing around with a lightsaber just feels good. It may not be the most vast and varied. Yeah, it can turn into a button masher even, but I still had fun with it. I do wish we could slice and dice our enemies to add that extra impact to combat. Maybe could have made it more interesting visually, like Metal Gear Rising Revengeance sort of system, but at this point I feel like I'm nitpicking it a little bit. You're rarely just using your lightsaber in combat encounters though, which is where the Force abilities can come in to save the day. I mean, what can you say about picking up a stormtrooper and just flinging them into absolute oblivion other than that's a good time. Now, there are quite a number of Force abilities Starkiller can gain access to through leveling up the standard abilities, but what everyone will have access to is the lightsaber throw, Force grip, Force push, Force lightning, and Force repulse. My personal favorites and the abilities I use the most by far is Force grip and Force lightning. Lightning in particular feeling the most overpowered in both a great and not so great way. You can absolutely melt enemies, even some bosses with Force lightning, which feels great, but can also take some of the challenge out of certain encounters. Force grip, well, I just said why I love this ability. Whether it be picking someone or something up and throwing them or it at enemies or into the abyss, it just adds a bit of humor into the combat that I really appreciated. I mean, you can do this in some boss fights too, which is just a recipe for some broken AI. Whilst I have some favorites or go-to abilities, that's not to say the likes of the lightsaber throw or Force push and repulse aren't good abilities too. Repulse in particular saving my ass a few times towards the end. Throwing around your lightsaber is always going to be awesome, though more useful against flying enemies, and push is good for, well, pushing enemies off cliffs or causing a knockback. The Force abilities definitely improve the combat as a whole, adding that much needed variety and just injecting some good old fashioned fun into the mix, but it isn't perfect, and like the lightsaber combat, it isn't as balanced as it could be. So the combat isn't perfect, maybe at times a little simplistic, but how do the bosses hold up? Are they the peak of the combat experience? Yes and no. Don't get me wrong, the bosses are a blast, can offer a real challenge and force the player to think about how to defeat these foes or offer an incredible spectacle. But as I mentioned, with the force abilities, they can break, sometimes momentarily, sometimes most of the fight. Despite some jank though, I really enjoyed these battles, and if they don't offer a challenge necessarily, they do offer a feeling of immense power. The first battle is against a rogue Jedi as Darth Vader, which before I forget, it feels great to play as Darth Vader during the tutorial. He just walks around with that power swagger, and enemies feel like almost a hassle to even bother raising a finger to. Sets up the feeling of power present throughout the game really well. Anyway, the rogue Jedi is a decent tutorial fight. You can deal quite a bit of damage to him rather quickly, but it does teach the player the general flow of a Jedi or lightsaber force battle. Debris flies everywhere to a point where you can't see a damn thing, which is a little annoying, but what you may notice playing the game today, and it's evident throughout the boss fights, they don't really flow. The lightsaber battles just have a bit of jank to the animations that feel almost like you're swinging through an enemy and not into an enemy, if that makes sense. But the Rogue Jedi isn't a bad fight. It shows the player how to deal with enemy force abilities, how to attack a lightsaber wielding foe, the various quicktime events that are possible, and again, playing as Vader is pretty damn awesome with a nice backdrop on Kashyyyk. The first true battle as Starkiller is against General Kota is one example of a breakage for me personally, a couple of times actually making for a fight that is no joke for the early game into something I breezed through a little too quickly. But when Kota is working properly, he's a good opponent. He mixes up his lightsaber and force attacks well, can pack a punch quickly, and you can't just spam him or really any of the bosses. You need to pick and even create openings, and that's an element of Kota and the other fights I really did enjoy. Plus, battling on a falling ship, watching out for the piping hot glass floor is pretty awesome. Next up, we have Kazdan Paratus, who has some jank again, but overall was pretty damn challenging for me this early in the game. Paratus is lightning quick, deals a lot of damage and has multiple phases and doesn't take too much damage in quick succession. Oh, and he summons these junk titans that if you are too low on health will end you relatively quickly. Force lightning also isn't that useful against him, which means again you need to find or create those slim openings other ways. I really enjoyed this fight. It's a great early game challenge, and whilst the force grab let me down a few times due to being a little too finicky, he is a fair but tough encounter. Up next is the battle against Shakti, whose arena is probably her biggest weapon, whether it be in the first or second phase, with these pus bubbles, I guess, and summoning enemies to help her. Her abilities aren't dissimilar to the other Jedi, and she's a tough cookie, I'll give her that. She had me on my toes, especially in that second phase where it changes perspective and you need to watch out for her, pus bubbles, enemies, and the giant tentacles. It's a lot on your plate, and managing to navigate all this and defeat her makes this fight really satisfying. Force push and grab create some jank, but that's just ever present in these battles, so I'll leave it be now. Next we have 3 different mini-bosses, all offering about the same level of challenge in the Shadow Guard, Captain Ozic, Stern, and the Bull Rancor, which if you use Force Lightning disappear with no struggle at all, but do act as those power trips which are important. The next true fight is against Maris Brood, who also has a Rancor involved in her battle, and she's a little bit of a pushover and honestly annoying to battle as she frequently goes invisible and doesn't come out and attack for a good chunk of time. Really, this is another battle against a Rancor for the first phase until she faces you one-on-one, which plays out much like the other Jedi battles. She still uses her invisibility, which sets her apart, but outside of that, I found this battle a little meh. Just feels lackluster when compared to the rest. After this fight though, we battle against Proxy, who changes between a few characters before ultimately ending up as Darth Maul, and this fight is badass. It's not the most challenging, but it is a chaotic battle with Proxy mixing it up with great frequency, making the player tap into their memory of previous battles, but the Darth Maul fight is the cherry on top. One, he's tough as nails and defeated me a couple of times due to my lack of respect after phase 1, but through force grabs, lightsaber clashes and alike, he can be taken down. One of my favorite battles in the game simply due to having Maul in this game. Pure badass and I love it. Then we go from that fight to not really a boss battle, but big encounter, and easily the most incredible moment in the game, bringing down the Star Destroyer with the Force. I'm not a massive fan of the constant TIE fighter interruptions and the inconsistent force grab, but the spectacle of this encounter is something I'll remember forever. I mean, the power trip afterwards is insane. Again, not the best encounter, but visually and in regards to Starkiller and maxing out the Force, incredible. Absolutely incredible. The second last battle in the game, potentially the last as well depending on your choice, is against Darth Vader himself, who isn't as tough as you may think, but a fun battle regardless. He doesn't leave a lot of openings, doesn't take big damage, deals a good smack, and can stun you to boot. This first phase is a blast, offers a tense encounter, and is just a badass boss to face. Phase 2 is a little simpler. Being able to throw things at Vader does seem to deal quite a lot of damage to him, but still as a whole, a really fun fight after all he's done to us is oh so satisfying. This fight with Vader can continue further, but as I said, I chose the light side and faced off against the final boss, Emperor Palpatine. This is a very solid final boss, even if the Emperor can sit in place and take a bit too many hits in a row to make him a brutal test. Still tough though, with picking Starkiller up, summoning shadow guards, throwing electric objects, shielding himself, it all leads to a good lengthy fight that will test your combat skills. And I mean, after all these movies and shows, it just feels so good to wail on Palpatine, even if, in my opinion, he does summon his shadow guards a little too often. Great fun though, and a good boss to finish the game on. Overall, yes, I believe I faced some form of jank, glitch, or broken AI in each boss battle, but as a whole, these bosses are great fun. They provide that combat challenge, that much needed variety to the combat, tense encounters, or absolute power trips the Star Wars universe had never seen. Highlights for me have to go to Proxy, Vader, and Palpatine, but I really did enjoy each encounter, jank and all. Again, it adds to the humor associated with this game for better or for worse. They may not always be the peak of the combat, but they are all good fun. Outside the combat, there isn't really too much to talk about. The platforming is fine, exploring the levels is fine. There's not really all that much to say about either. I have more of a problem with the levels themselves because platforming not being a big factor is fine and could have been better if there was more reasons to explore the Force Unleashed. As a fan of Star Wars, I was excited every time I arrived on a new planet and wanted to go out and explore and see what I could find. The problem is there isn't much incentive to go out and explore. That's not to say there's nothing, because you can find some new lightsaber colors or outfits or force points and abilities, which are all well and good, but visually to go out and get them is lackluster, being these bright lights and not much else. There's not really any secret details or physical items to see and collect, and because of that, finding those collectibles just feels sort of meh and doesn't encourage me to go out and explore these worlds. The levels themselves are all well and good, with Kashyyyk being my personal favourite both in the tutorial and afterwards, but they are heavily combat oriented and don't really involve much else. They're just something I found to be a bit bare bones, and as big of a fan as I am, I lost interest in exploring after a few costumes and lightsaber colours. The combat is so continuous that this isn't a huge issue, but then it probably contributes to why the combat can grow repetitious quicker with fewer gameplay mechanics and reasons to explore to draw focus. I realize I'm sounding rather harsh, and I can't reiterate enough that The Force Unleashed was so much fun to play, but it's not perfect, and at this point has been surpassed in certain instances, namely the gameplay, by other games. With all that being said, I have saved the best for last. So let's talk DLC. The DLC for The Force Unleashed may be incredibly short, coming in at 30 minutes a pop, but man, do they pack some content into that half an hour. I will say I believe Jedi Temple is the weakest DLC, or maybe least interesting for me because of how awesome Hoth and Tatooine are, and the Jedi Temple just sort of has you face off against a really evil Starkiller, but it's still enjoyable and has some tough enemy encounters to boot. Tatooine is amazing though, as you travel across Tatooine, make your way through Jabba's palace, fighting off Rancor and the iconic cronies, all to end up facing off against Boba Fett in a unique, maybe a little simple but fun boss fight, followed by facing off against Obi-Wan, and then just when you think it's done, Obi-Wan's ghost as well, which again, bit janky, but oh my god, is it awesome, and all of this is barely over half an hour long. I love the themes of the Tatooine and Hoth DLC being about integrating Starkiller into the original trilogy, and damn does Tatooine make A New Hope seem bleak as hell. I think Tatooine is the best DLC, but Hoth isn't too shabby either. It just has less exciting boss battles, with the big fan appeal coming from exploring the trenches and caverns of the Rebel Alliance on Hoth, hunting down Luke Skywalker. The enemy encounters and exploring is all well and good, but the fight against Luke is surprisingly easy, but shows a great what if about Luke turning to the dark side that makes this battle exciting, and it's a fun battle even if it may not be too difficult. The DLC was a real highlight gameplay wise for me because it wasn't something I remembered all that much, and yet was filled with so many great moments and fan service moments to boot that feel great to participate in. Overall, I have to be honest, the gameplay package is dated by today's standards. The combat isn't particularly deep, the bosses encounter weird bugs, and that's the main focus of this game because everything else is sort of exists. The gameplay is far from perfect, but I'll be damned if it isn't still a good time to play. The badass moments are just as awesome as ever. I mean, the Star Destroyer might very well be one of my favorite moments in gaming. The combat can be repetitive, but can also be so expressive and flat out fun, mixing in your force abilities and lightsaber combat. The boss battles personally bugged out for me a bit too often, but they're not game breaking and still offer some serious challenge and strategy to get past. The DLC is well worth experiencing even today, and overall, call me blinded by nostalgia, but it is still a good time to play all these years later, despite newer and more sleek offerings since then. So, was Star Wars The Force Unleashed as good as I remembered? I'm sure this is a shocker for nobody, but no, unfortunately it wasn't. But that's okay. I always say this at the beginning of my retrospectives, and it's true. Nostalgia is a hell of a thing, especially when it involves something from your childhood. When it's been a minute since your last venture into a game, nostalgia, just like hype, can build and build until we reach a ridiculous level that the game could never live up to. It's okay that not every game feels fresh and new over a decade later. It's the nature of the beast. But that doesn't mean I think The Force Unleashed is a bad game now. I still think it's damn good, especially in the story department nowadays with a great protagonist in Starkiller, and the gameplay is still a fun time to play through. It's just not as good as I remembered, but it's still one of the best Star Wars games in my humble opinion, an important Star Wars game that pushed what we thought was possible at the time, and I'm still incredibly thankful that this game exists. Thank you all so much for watching my Star Wars The Force Unleashed retrospective. I had a lot of fun revisiting The Force Unleashed at the end of the day, and I hope you enjoyed revisiting the game with me. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave it a like because it helps let me know that you enjoyed yourself. Comment below your thoughts on The Force Unleashed, as well as any suggestions for games you want to see covered in the future. Shout out to the channel members Infamous Sir Hellfire, featuring Gaziano, Christian Volgag, and Cloud Connection. I apologize if I mispronounced any of those names. For that extra level of support, I truly do appreciate it. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, go give my socials a follow if you fancy, at MayorHairBear, join the Discord server to have a chat, and I'll catch you all in the next video.